Hey everybody, are we ready to get real? Welcome to the launching episode of the Get Real podcast. I'm your host, Blaine Mengel. I just want to tell you firstly how excited I am to get this thing off the ground finally. I want to thank a few of my friends for kicking me in the butt and getting me rolling on this. This has been a long time coming. So I would like to start this out with a quote. That will be one of my staples. I will start out with some sort of an inspirational, personal growth, or reality quote. One of my favorite quotes is from a guy named Robert Heinlein. In the absence of clearly defined goals, we become strangely loyal to performing daily trivia until we ultimately become enslaved by it. Enslaved by it. Daily trivia. Part of my story, and this is what you're going to hear on this podcast. You're going to hear me, my story. I have quite a story. I've had a lot of people tell me recently, you should probably write a book, dude. And I thought, well, let's get started with a TikTok channel, some YouTube videos, and eventually a podcast. Because things are trending in that direction. People are listening. People want to hear influencers. People are not going to classes, going to schools anymore for information. They are going to the influencers. And I've been told by enough people that I'm an influencer, so I'm going to get rolling here. Get real, R-E-E-L. You say, well, what does that mean? Real isn't spelled R-E-E-L unless you're fishing. I was a professional bass fisherman. I actually was a guide in Pennsylvania on several rivers and also hosted a TV show. We fished all over the northeastern part of the United States. So a lot of my perspective on life, a lot of my perspective on growth, a lot of my perspective on finance, a lot of my perspective on just about everything that life has to offer, I really like to put it into the context of fishing, right? Like one of my favorite bands is Rush, and one of their most popular songs is called Tom Sawyer. His reserve, a quiet defense, riding out the day's events. The river, that's the lyric. Rivers are very much in tune with everything that I do in my life. So we use the name Get Real kind of as a play on words, but kind of not, because we're going to get real here. My story is really about standing for what's real, standing for what's right, not conforming to whoever they are, not conforming to who they want you to be, but just being in a now moment, right now, the person that you were created to be in this moment, not what they told you in the past, not what you think you should be in the future, but right now. So are you ready to get real? Again, I'm your host, Blaine Mengel. Couldn't be happier, couldn't be more excited. First of all, I'd also like to say this podcast is brought to you by Gamma Copoly Polyflex Fishing Line. They were a sponsor of my TV show, and if you're going out on the water, I don't care if you're trout fishing, walleye fishing, if you're fishing for sturgeon, if you're fishing for largemouth, smallmouth bass, pike, muskie, doesn't matter if you're just crappie fishing, you want to give Gamma Fishing Line a try. That's Gamma, Gamma Fishing Line, owned by Black Knight Industries. If you want information, reach out to me and I'll be happy to get it for you. So what are we going to be getting real about? Well, I told you a little bit about the bass fishing background. How about we just start with who am I? Who is Blaine? I won't use my last name very often here, and you'll understand why as you go along with this podcast, with more episodes on the podcast. That's going to be really fun. So I'll tell you what, let's get real. I'll get real. I'll get real first. You guys can listen to me get real, and hopefully you'll get something out of this. So, was born and raised in Eastern Pennsylvania. Did the dance. I'll just put it that way. Everything was classic, middle class America, dad working 60 hours a week, mom home with the kids the first number of years, go to school. and one thing I will just say about the first 12 years of my life is I just never felt like I fit, right? I never felt like I fit in. I was the guy that would always walk around, well, why is this? Well, why do we have to learn that in class? Well, what's wrong with her? Well, it never made sense. None of it ever made any sense to me. And the way I used to tell my story when I was in the church circles, if you will, I would say I felt like I was dropped off from another planet. And in my adult years, I felt the same way. But one perfect example, here's a story. 4th grade, I come home from school. My mom says, your teacher called. I was like, uh-oh, when the teacher calls back then, it's like, uh-oh, you're in trouble. And teacher called, and she said, she's very concerned about your behavior in school. And I said, what did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. And she said, well, she was very concerned. And my mom started to laugh. And I said, what are you laughing at? She said, the teacher was concerned because she said he's sitting in class and he's got a pencil and he's got a little ball of paper rolled up. And he's throwing it up in the air and hitting it with his pencil across the desk. And he's not listening to what I'm saying. My mom said, well, yeah, he's playing baseball. And that's a perfect example. I did not care, what 7/3 divided by 4/2 was, or 4/1, or 4/8, or whatever the fractions were. I didn't care. I wanted to play baseball. I wanted to sing. And then I found out as I was, got older in my childhood, in my teen years, I wanted to fish, and I never understood why we were, the way I saw it, the way I worded it, being indoctrinated. And I'm not here to argue, education and whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, but I will say this. The word education stems from the Latin root educo, or educa. It means to draw from within, to educe, to bring out. And what I am, right in this moment right now, what I am was inscribed into me as a person, into my DNA. So anybody who is trying to, quote, educate me by pumping information into me, their information, the information they want me to have so that I will be a good standing citizen or worker or student or whatever, that's not an educator at all. A good educator recognizes what's already inside of a child or a person or an adult in many cases, and does what he can or she can to bring that out of that person. Okay, so that was important. I never understood why I had to learn what they thought I needed to learn, but you just did it anyway, right? And that's probably about the story of most of my childhood. I just did it anyway. Now, I loved baseball. I played baseball. I was a good baseball player. I was a decent basketball player. I played football. I obviously was smitten by females. I loved girls. But I was always scared. I was always concerned. I always had a complex around my skinniness and the way I looked. And I was made fun of. Kids are made fun of. Kids are merciless a lot of times. I don't believe I was really bullied, although from today's terminology, I was definitely bullied. And yeah, it did cause some trauma, if you want to use that terminology. It did cause some trauma. But as I grew, I took a couple years and took some college classes, never knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Got married, had a job in the medical field as a medical assistant, divorced in that situation, had 3 beautiful daughters who I loved to pieces. Good relationships with my daughters. I loved my daughters. We did a lot of vacations, did a lot of things. They always thought I was flaky because I was a guy that was never satisfied. One thing too, I heard Bob Proctor say it this way, and this really describes me as a person to a T, up almost to this very day. He said, it's really good for a person to be happy. You can be happy with where you are in life. You can be grateful for what you have and where you are and what you're doing in life. But if you haven't reached your goal, if you haven't gotten the desire of your heart, in other words, that burning desire, if you will, don't ever be satisfied. Dissatisfaction, he said, is a creative state. You can just think about Scripture. There was something in Scripture, and we'll get into some of that as we go, believe me. I won't touch on too much of that now, but Scripture is in part about a dissatisfied holy husband seeking his bride. He's not satisfied, right? He's just not satisfied. We have that creative energy and that creative value within us. So I'm in the medical field, and had a mentor in my life basically tell me, you're not happy. You need to do something that you want to do, that you're willing to get up every morning and do. And I was arguing with him on the phone one day, and he said, Blaine, what do you want to do? I said, I want to fish. And he laughed. He says, good, then go fishing. And my response to that was, you can't make a living fishing. This guy was a roofer, folks. He was a roofer, and he came back with this. Oh, he said, so those guys you're watching on Saturdays on TV who are fishing those tournaments and who have those TV shows with all those commercials and getting those fancy boats and all those guys, they ain't making any money doing that? And I sat back and I'm like, Well, to shorten the story, I bought a boat and went fishing and started to learn how to smallmouth bass fish the Delaware, Susquehanna, Schuylkill, Juniata rivers in eastern Pennsylvania. And I quit that medical field and became a professional full-time smallmouth bass fishing guide. And I was doing what I loved. I was getting paid to fish 170 to 200 days a year on the water. I mean, I had NFL quarterbacks on my boat. I had a very prominent medical person on my boat one day, and he looked at me and he said, God, Blaine, I wish I could do what you do. And I sat there and I just kind of chuckled, and I says, yeah, until you have to get the bills paid. I said, you're probably a little better off in that field than a guy only fishing 160 or 180 days a year. And I kind of laughed, but deep down that comment came from a place of dissatisfaction, from a place of pain. There I am fishing every day and loving it. I love catching smallmouth. I love being on the water. And we'll talk a lot about water on this podcast. A lot about water, right? But there was something missing. All I'll say is there's something missing, and we're going to talk. If you've got something missing in your life, if you haven't gotten that desire, that burning desire, if you're in that daily trivia that I spoke of in the beginning with that quote, and you don't know how to get out of that, you don't know that there is even a way out of that, or you've been told by them, whoever they are in your life, you're better off doing this. They need you to do this, right? Then this is the podcast for you, because we're going to get into a lot of that. And we're going to go deep into some of that. Fast forward, I was guiding, doing it full time, doing seminars, doing shows, outdoor expos, you name it. I had a website with lure sales, an online store and all that cool stuff. I wrote 2 books and got an offer to host a TV show. I hosted a show locally for 1 year, and out of the blue, I got an offer to be on NBC Sports Outdoors, which was Versus back in the day. And Backwoods Angler TV was launched, and we were national for 4 years. We were on NBC Sports Outdoors and the World Fishing Network for 4 years. And at that time, that longing inside of me when I would get home at night after doing what I loved, and I loved it. I want to reiterate, I want to make that very clear. I was loving what I was doing every day, but there was something missing, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand why I still had to pay bills. I didn't understand why I was alone after my divorce, after my marriage failed. I didn't understand why the courts were what the courts were. I didn't understand the financial system, the governmental system, religion, and I was going way deeper into Christianity at that point. There was something missing in all of it. I left the water, is the best way to describe it. Fast forward a little bit, became a missionary, went to Kenya, and served as a missionary in Kenya briefly, and then in the eastern United States, in New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania areas as a worship leader. I was a prophetic singer, spontaneous and prophetic worship leader. Saw some really, really cool stuff. I mean, loved it. Loved the singing. I loved the people that I met. But it allowed me to go deeper into, quote, spirituality, into Christianity than the church was even willing to go. I started to do etymology. I started to do etymological studies and word studies and learned what our language was all about, and, how we were actually speaking spells over people with the English language. And I went deeper and deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole, and it changed my life. I basically left the Christian church, and I got remarried in that time frame. And I loved the singing, I loved the going deeper into the spirit. I'm a very spiritual, very, I'm a deep thinker. And I loved where singing and where the prophetic, spontaneous nature of what I did took me in the spirit. But as I moved forward with my faith and studied and went deeper and did word studies and did etymologies of words, sorry about that. And, I started to learn about our language and about a lot of things that were hidden in plain sight. I learned about a lot of lies that we've been told. I learned a lot of that stuff, and I don't want to get into that too much now, because those are going to be topics for podcasts down the road. So that brings me to here. I got remarried in that time frame, and my second wife and I are actually divorced as well currently. And that really put me into a tailspin. But what it's caused me to do is to take a real deep look at who I am. And that's really what this podcast is about. We're all seeking an identity, if you will, and my identity in the beginning was I was a son. I was born as a male. I was a son. That was my first identity. Then I was a kindergarten. I was a kid and a kindergarten teacher, or kindergarten, student, right up the line. Then I was somebody's husband, somebody's father. I worked in the medical field. I was a bass fisherman. I was backwoods angler. I always had this identity, right? But I never felt like it was me. I always thought it was something else. And so when I say get real, R-E-E-L, I'm using the play on words for the fishing. We're going to go fishing, right? You and I are going to go fishing on this podcast. We're going to talk about some deep things. We're going to talk about things like admiralty, maritime law. We're going to break down etymologies of some of the words that you're speaking every day, speaking spells over yourself and other people. We're going to talk about bass fishing. We're going to talk about current and rivers and weather. But more importantly, we're going to talk about you and me. In this now moment, who are you? Who am I? And how can we consolidate our ideas and help each other? That's what this podcast is about. So I want to keep this first episode relatively short. There's a lot more I could say, but I feel like I gave you kind of a pretty good preface. In this day and age, everybody knows it. Like I said, people aren't going to classes as much for information as they are going to the influencer. Knowledge and information is so readily available, you carry it in your pocket every day. Like back in the day, you had to go to a library or the Barnes & Noble or Walden Books or whatever bookstore and buy a book and then read the book. Today, all you have to do is click a couple buttons or pull out your phone, an iPad, whatever it is, and you've got the information right there in seconds. I'm a real big Rush fan. Rush is my absolute favorite band. Neil Peart was one of the greatest lyricists, greatest drummer of all time, one of the greatest lyricists as well. And two of his lyrical lines that I've adopted into my life: "Constant change is here to stay," from their song Digital Man. And from another one from Tom Sawyer: "He knows changes aren't permanent, but change is." So we're going to go through some changes together, because all you have to do is turn on social media, and I'm not going to suggest you turn on your TV. Don't turn on your TV if you want real information about what's really going on out there. We are involved in the greatest transition of wealth in human history. We are involved in some absolutely ridiculously crazy, quote, politics right now. We're going to break that word down in this podcast. 50 years ago, think of it this way, and then I'm going to end. 50 years ago, it may have taken 3, 4, 5 hours for your mom, grandmother, great-grandmother to actually cook a really good meal for dinner, right? Maybe even longer. Some days it was all day. Today, they have 10-minute meal plans. It's a drive-through, fast food, easy pass society. Just pull out your phone. You can order dinner and have it at your door in a half an hour if that's what you want to do. Things are changing way too fast for some people to handle, right? So we're going to slow things down a little bit. And what I hope this podcast accomplishes, I hope it helps you to find out who you really are. We're going to tell the truth here. We're going to uncover some things that have been hidden in plain sight from you for a long time. More importantly, we're going to get real. R-E-E-L.